Because this whole like sentimental, like, oh, I have a full-time job, I deserve to be here. No, it doesn't work like that. They do. No one cares. They just want the rent. Like, that's it. Welcome back, y'all. There's the Drunk Capitalist here today, and we're gonna watch CNBC Make It. Today, they're talking about why rent is out of control in New York City. CNBC Make It talks about a lot of different things happening with millennials, with money, and just in general. Sometimes they even examine people's budgets. I really do like watching these videos, and I think I'm gonna probably review a lot more of them. But I wanted to review this video first because as a person that grew up and lived in New York City pretty much my entire life, I have firsthand experience about what's really going on, and I'm gonna see and gauge what's going on in this video as people describe what it's like to live in New York City, and CNBC helps them break down what's going on and why rent is out of control. So let's get right to the video.
We saw the number and it was just insane. It's literally doubling what we're paying right now.
We never expected that much of a hike. I mean, that was just a real shock to us.
This apartment is not worth $3,500. There is nothing worth $3,500 in New York City.
I would say her saying that there's nothing worth $3,500 in New York City is a little bit off, because there are some really nice apartments that are definitely worth $3,500. But in general, she's right. $3,500 ain't nothing worth $3,500 in New York City. But again, we're talking about capitalism. It's worth whatever somebody gonna pay for it. If you're gonna pay $3,500 and your apartment's worth $3,500, what are we going to do? What are we gonna do about it? Like, let's go.
Rents in New York City are at an all-time high. In June 2022, citywide median asking rent reached $3,500. That's about a 35% increase from 2021. The median asking rent is $4,100 in Manhattan, $3,200 in Brooklyn, and $2,600 in Queens. Half the renters.
Yeah, like, I'm not gonna lie to you. I mean, everyone knows Manhattan has always been like the place to go. That's like the quintessential New York city life, whatever. There's really no space there. Like, your apartment is really usually a shoebox. Like, half the time you look up a apartment in Manhattan, it'd be like $3,000-$4,000, and you don't even have a kitchen. They'll give you a hot plate like, and call it a stove. Like, seriously, it's pretty crazy. And Brooklyn has slowly been on the rise right now of a lot of people that previously lived in Manhattan and have been displaced from Manhattan have moved into Brooklyn, which obviously pushes the cost of rent in Brooklyn up. Queens, people don't really like Queens. I grew up in Queens. People don't really like Queens, but it's because it's more residential than the other boroughs. So I'm just explaining for anybody that, isn't from New York or hasn't been here. Queens is more residential, so you would find a lot more homes and home owners in Queens than you would find renters, because there just aren't as many apartment buildings, and most neighborhoods just don't have apartment buildings at all, right? So Queens has always been like, oh, it's not as fun because there isn't like a huge strip of bars, or people don't live above corner stores and above like on avenues full of like stores. Like, it's just not as common in Queens. There's small pockets that it exists, but in general it doesn't. So Queens, the rent there is gonna rise slower because younger people aren't rushing to go live in Queens because it's so like residential, so family like. It's like you go there when you're 40 and married and have children. But anyway, let's get back to this. Monthly paycheck, how many people are paying?
In New York City spend more than 30% of their income on rent, and a third of renters spend more than 50%.
My mom called me the other day and she's like, you're 31, you should own property. And I literally said, with what money? Because it all goes to my rent.
In 2021, New York City surpassed San Francisco as the most expensive city in the US to rent a one-bedroom apartment. With the city...
I mean, yeah, a one-bedroom apartment is super expensive in New York City. But back to what she was saying, that like her being like 31 and not owning an apartment. See, this is something that I'm a weirdo. I'm gonna just get that straight. This is something I thought about when I was much younger, and when I learned that the most common type of mortgage is a 30-year mortgage. Now, say you do finally get into a home when you're 30 years old and you have a 30-year mortgage. You are paying that mortgage until you're 60, which generally means you'll be working until you're $60. And that always struck a nerve with me. It was always uncomfortable because I have grandparents, and 60 seemed old to be working, and I don't want to work at 60. So ideally you would want to get a house earlier in like your 20s, or like at least situate yourself as best as you can in your 20s, so that you don't have to force yourself into a situation where you're overworking at an older age when things hurt more, the body aches more, there's more pains, and things are falling, gravity is doing its job, like, and you can't fight it anymore. Like, I've always been like that, and you know, I'm cutting it pretty close right now, but that is like the next goal, you know what I'm saying? So I get what she's saying, but you're paying, like, you're deciding to live in New York City and pay New York City rent. The reason you don't have a house is because that's what you're doing. That's why you don't have a house. Like, you could probably be 2 years from getting a house if you just didn't rent in New York City, or you rented in New York City with roommates, but instead you're like, oh, I'm gonna live on my own in Manhattan. But hey, by all means.
Entering the most competitive rental market in a decade, affordable housing is increasingly hard to find.
I'm going to filter for 2 bedrooms, which is what I'm living in right now, for $22.50, which is what I'm paying right now in my current neighborhood, and there's nothing, literally no matches.
Some renters who got pandemic discounts are seeing their rent increase by at least 30%. For market rate apartments, rent increases aren't regulated, meaning landlords can charge as much as they think they can get on the open market.
My name is Casey Cleary. I'm 39 years old, and my rent went up $700.
My name is Thelma Rose Anon. I'm 32, and my rent increased $1,100.
My name's Ernestine Sue. I'm 23 years old, and my rent increased by $2,100 a month.
Oh, damn. Like, I'm not even gonna lie to you. That shit. Oh my God. Like, yikes. I don't even know how to describe that or do the math or like try to start explaining to y'all like how crazy that sounds. Like, your rent doubling, like 95% is crazy. But then again, there's reasons for this, and I hope they bring these points up. I don't want to like bring it up early and then they bring it up. Let's see if they bring it up first. There's reasons why things like this happen, and we're just gonna get right into it. Let's keep going.
So what's causing these unprecedented rent hikes? And is there an end in sight?
New York's been expensive for a very long time, and that has to do with demand,
Facts.
right? People want to live here.
I saw an episode on Oprah with my mom about making.
Exactly. Supply and demand is basic economics, and New York is the epicenter of finance for like the entire globe. So like, the fact that you think capitalism isn't going to be alive and well in the epicenter of like where the world trade is, you're just a little bit delusional to me. But let's keep listening to Thelma.
A vision board. So I made one when I was 17 before college, and I had New York on there and Manhattan.
Everything's here. You have all walks of life, anything you want, any cuisine you want. You have Broadway, museums, everything.
Couple that with persistently low housing supply, and you have a recipe for extremely expensive city.
After the pandemic hit in March 2020, New York City's population dropped by about 340,000.
Renters are fleeing New York City, leaving a record number of empty apartments in Manhattan, and as vacancies rise, rents are dropping.
During this period, rental inventory reached levels not seen in over a decade. The last time rents in New York had such a significant drop-off was during the 2009 financial crisis.
When the pandemic.
So because the rents are already high, and most people are living in New York City because of the access and ease of access of so many different conveniences, entertainment, all that stuff, people were like, wait, I'm gonna be in the middle of a pandemic in my apartment, I might as well get a cheaper apartment. Yeah, that's the smartest move. So those 300-something thousand people that moved out of New York City, including myself, they were making the smarter move, because it will never add up, right? Okay, it'll never make sense. So now the inventory increased because so many people left. Now that increase in inventory now it became a renter's market. So the renters now had more incentives towards going into these cheaper apartments. But here's the thing. This is New York City we're talking about. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. So to me, the reason I didn't jump into a nice Brooklyn apartment during the pandemic when rents were low is because that's a fool's game. I already knew the rent was going to go right back up because the cheap rental prices come with an asterisk. Okay, they come with a huge asterisk, as in, as soon as things go back to normal, understand I will charge you every dollar that you were willing to spend on this apartment. And if you're not wanting to spend it, someone else will, because at the end of the day, this apartment is worth whatever someone will pay for it.
Pandemic happened, a lot of us millennials, Gen Z, we kind of laughed that we are finally able to afford to live in the city that we love so much.
At the height of the pandemic, a
Temporarily.
third of listings in New York City were offering rental concessions in the form of 1 month or more of free rent.
Being a landlord in the beginning of the pandemic was quite scary. There were so many unknowns, and as New York City started to shut down, there was this concern, well, what about all of our units? Are tenants going to be able to pay rent? What's going to happen? We have a lot of expenses as small landlords, our mortgages, our city bills.
Ernestine, a recent college grad from California, moved to New York in January 2021 to start her first job for CNBC's Fast Money.
New York City was empty at the time. People were away from the city.
She and her roommate found a 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan's East Village for $22.50.
We actually got a great deal.
That's a really good deal in East Village in Manhattan. $22.50 for a 2-bedroom. That's like, you don't see those prices. You're never going to see them again until something else happens. But then, of course, they're going to go back up. But as we're just seeing with Ernestine right now, she came from California and moved all the way to New York City in 2021, right? Just last year. And now her rent has gone up double. And it's because, as in they mentioned in the video earlier, this free rent thing, like free months of rent, that is not a real thing. And people don't even take a extra few minutes to really try to figure out what they're even talking about when it comes to rent incentives. Hopefully she talks about it some more, but if not, I'll break it down for y'all.
I believe we got like a month or 2 off of the rent. So our rent was actually discounted. And also our apartment has in-unit washer dryer, which you don't find a lot in New York City unless you're paying a premium.
Fire. Yeah, so basically she's saying that they got some free months of rent. That does not exist. That's not a real thing. These free months are just made up. What really happens is that the landlords or what do you call them, like brokers or whatever, the people that help you find apartments, whatever, what they do is they post a net effective rent. And during the pandemic, especially 2020, when things were really slowing down with rentals, that was like the height of when net effective rents became like a booming thing in the rental market, right? So actually, let's look up net effective rents. So net effective rent is basically when your landlord advertises a specific price in order to advertise a lower payment per month. They do net effective and say, hey, you're getting 1 month of free rent or 2 months of free rent or 3 months of free rent. But all those free months will be paid, except they're just going to be spread out over the other months that you will be paying. So for example, if let's do like a really simple one. If your rent is $1,000 a month and you pay a 12-month lease, essentially you'll be paying $12,000 per a month per year, right, for the term of the lease. But if you get a net effective rent, they can advertise a different price based on how many free months they're giving you. So essentially they can change the rent to be like well, say they gave you 3 months off, they can change it take off $3,000 off the first 3 months and then spread it out on the other 9 months, and then you'll pay, what's 3,000 divided by 12? Let's do that math.
She and her husband had been living in their Upper East Side 1-bedroom apartment since 2015 and received a $450 rent cut during the pandemic.
We really strongly considered moving out and finding a new apartment, something with better space for the same price. But our landlord actually came back and said, we'll lower the rent to X amount. So we were pretty happy.
Thelma has been living in New York since 2018. In 2020, she reached a personal milestone and got her own.
So already we have 2 people that are not even from New York City. One that moved in 2018 and one that moved here in 2020. So they're not even like 10-year New Yorkers or like, you know, been here for a decade or even half a decade. They're just people who came to New York. And all my friends know exactly how I feel about that. I feel like that is the problem. But they refuse to see themselves as the problem.
1-bedroom apartment.
So I found this apartment on Street Easy for $1882, and it was a 1-bedroom, and I thought that was an incredible price because you can never find that in New York. So I instantly jumped onto it. And then it increased to $2,400 the next year. There's been a lot of times where I had oatmeal for.
Yeah, she realized right away why that has never been advertised in New York, why $1,800 for a 1-bedroom in Manhattan has never been $1,800 for like the past like 20 years. And she learned very quickly within a year, it went up to $2,400. Come on, bro.
For dinner because I needed to pay my rent. And when the pandemic happened and I was able to not only find this place, but afford it because it became affordable, I was so excited. But that looming presence of rent increasing again was always in the back of my head.
This is real.
In mid-2021, New York City began to come back to life as vaccines became available and restrictions were lifted.
New York City is dead forever. That was the proclamation from some last year when sidewalks across the city emptied and many small businesses closed their doors for good. But new data today shows a reawakening.
Rents soared as tenants lost the bargaining power that they had at the height of the pandemic.
I've been in the business 13 years and I've never seen the rental market quite like this. I've seen it competitive, but not where there's bidding wars for rental properties.
My original rent was $2,250, so they're saying if I want to renew the rent, it will be $4,395. So, yeah.
Yeah, again, it's supply and demand. And if you don't live in a rent stabilized apartment, you have an even harder time coping with the increases in rent. So I just want to preface this by saying I'm not trying to be like unsympathetic to everyone's situation here, but I do want to bring awareness to why you need to really research what's going on and like how things actually works, how money works, how supply and demand works, like how a contract works. Like if you're not reading anything up on your apartment or what kind of apartment it is, if it's just a market apartment, like obviously she's living in a market apartment, meaning that it's going to go with the market. If the market is saying a 2-bedroom, people are paying $500,000 for a 2-bedroom. I know 500,000 is exaggeration, but if the market is saying people are willingly paying $500,000 for a 2-bedroom, then that's what they're going to want to charge you for a 2-bedroom. Because if you don't pay it, someone else will, because they now have proof that people will pay it. And the reason I say like people like this that are people that move from different cities. Well, she came from an expensive place, California. But people that move from different cities in order to seek out the opportunities here in New York, they don't realize that they contribute heavily to the issue because they're the first ones that are willing to pay $1,000 for a bedroom in an apartment that doesn't have any amenities. That pushes up everyone's rent dramatically as supply goes down and demand goes up, and then also what people are paying is also going up. If you're paying half of all your income into your rent and you're not even getting all the space, amenities, and things that you want, then you're basically telling the market that you'll pay for anything. You know what I'm saying? And it's especially weird. It's just a weird situation. But I do want people to understand and try to think about how the choices that they make really determines the outcome of like the long term of their life. And I feel like putting so much money into really nice apartments at a really young age is kind of like you're doing yourself a disservice more often than not.
I actually did refresh my page because I thought this was an error. And I looked at the number and I just started laughing. $3,500. Like, I had to keep saying it out loud to myself because it was such a ridiculous number that I was like, this cannot be possible. This must be a joke.
When we got a new lease increase, we really wanted to talk to the landlord and discuss an option of, can we negotiate a little bit, or is there any wiggle room? And they just wrote back within 15 minutes saying no, that they already gave us a preferred rate of that $700 increase. So they were not willing to budge on negotiations at all.
Yeah, the landlord was basically saying, like, we already gave you a discount because you're already here, and it technically is a little bit easier for us to not have to move you out and risk anything on another tenant when we know you can pay the bill. And if you want to stay here, it's $700 more. But if you don't, then we'll take the risk and look for someone that will pay for it, because we will find someone that will pay for it. So basically, they're like, hey, this is the compromise. I'm going to increase it a bit, you accept it, or I'm going to increase it a lot and you don't accept it. Like, it's either way, we don't get more money. It's the market. Like,
I didn't think our apartment was worth $2,700. It's small and it doesn't really have all the amenities, the 4th floor walk up. The $2,700 is also our preferred rate, where it's actually at $3,100.
Now, with inventory very low, landlords can charge much higher rates and certainly make up some of the losses that they incurred during the pandemic.
I think some of the misconceptions that people have about New York City landlords is that every single one is a huge institution just reaping in profits, when in reality there are a lot of small landlords, especially throughout Brooklyn and Queens, who maybe they live in one unit and rent out the other, and they're dependent on these renters to, offset their mortgage and expenses.
Of the city's nearly 3.6 million units, 2/3 are rentals. About 1 million are rent stabilized, meaning that rents can only be increased by a fixed amount each year. But even those lucky enough to be living in rent-stabilized units are seeing larger than usual rent increases. In June 2022, the New York City Rent Guidelines Board approved a 3.25% increase on one-year leases and a 5% increase on two-year leases, the highest rent hike in nearly a decade.
I mean, if I'm being honest, I don't see those rent increases as being crazy and egregious, like, 3.5 and 5%. Like, we're talking about $3.50 per every $100 for the rent. So I mean, like, because that is actually lower than inflation right now, if we're doing the math. Like, that's lower than inflation. So that's the best deal you're gonna get, is a rent stabilized apartment in New York City. But most people, when you find a rent stabilized apartment, like myself, you are in no rush to go anywhere at all.
The growing borough has been Manhattan in terms of prices. Manhattan was also the hardest hit, and now we're seeing prices that are higher than 40% year over year. That would have been something I thought was a typo years ago, but is now a sad reality for people living in Manhattan and trying to cope.
If I'm already checking off the boxes of what makes a great tenant, I have a full-time job, I make over 6 figures, I'm single, quiet, and I can't even afford to live here, who is the housing market for?
So right when we received...
So her saying all these things and, like, listing out her qualifications that will make her a good tenant in New York City is kind of like, I mean, it sounds really sad and all that stuff when they play the music and stuff, but it's just like, you have to realize that I'm coming from a native New Yorker who was born in New York. You have to realize that you are not special. Nobody cares that you want to be a New Yorker, that you identify with New York. You have to get out of that thinking and just be like, you got to be cutthroat by your own life and just be like, yo, can I afford it? Can I not? If I can't afford it, if it don't make sense, I got to go. I got to go somewhere else. Because this whole, like, sentimental, like, I have a full-time job, I deserve to be here. No, it doesn't work like that. No one cares. They just want the rent. Like, that's it. They don't care about anything else. They just want the rent.
The lease renewal in the mail, we just knew immediately we're not going to do this.
We actually found a great one that we liked. It was over in Kew Gardens in Queens. We started to put an application in, and later that day I was laid off from my position and my role. And anybody that knows New York City, you need proof of employment, an offer letter, pay stubs, and at that point I didn't have any of that.
Casey and her husband left their Upper East Side apartment and moved into an Airbnb in the Bronx.
We thought that that was the best choice for us because it allowed for a lot of flexibility. They do offer short-term leases, which was really nice. It was almost like a sublet. We said no to...
Yeah, I get the going to Airbnb type thing, but I also feel like Airbnb, they could just be like, can you leave? So I get the Airbnb thing to like move into in the interim while you find a new job, and then you can then move to a place that you actually want to move to. So I get that.
$700, and you know, we did think about that, but I think in retrospect I would have done a little bit more research and looked for different apartments and put a little bit more effort into making a decision before we actually just said no to our landlord. We realized that after it was all said and done, the Airbnb itself really cost just about as much as the rent increase would have been at that $2,700.
As I apartment hunt, I grow frustrated.
Wait, hold on. So basically she moved and it's the same price, basically living in an Airbnb, except the Airbnb does come with more flexibility than the rent contract. But I don't know. You know what's distracting about this video is that she's talking about, you know, I guess being with her boyfriend or husband or whatever, but we don't hear his side of anything. We just have predominantly women in this, and yeah, it's a diverse group of 3 women, but I just feel like we don't have the voice of any men. Not to say that the men will bring a extra, you know, nuance to the situation or anything like that, but it will be cool if there were more voices, like the voice of men, of what they were going through, because they could have very easily just interviewed her husband instead, or interviewed them together, but you know, whatever. I guess it's
frustrated because I see very blatantly the benefits of what boroughs have and what other boroughs don't. Like, what do I give up? Do I give up having access to be able to get food easily, or do I give up being able to walk to a doctor? Do I give up my...
How often do you go to the doctor? Yes, give up being able to walk to the doctor. You don't need to be down the block from your doctor. Like, you don't go to the doctor once a week. If you did, then okay, I get it. Being close to a grocery store, yes, okay. I get that you want to be close to a grocery store. That makes sense. But saying something like the doctor is crazy. You know what I mean? Saying something like, oh, I want to make sure I'm walking distance from a tavern is crazy. I'm sorry, I'm going in now. But it's just like, yes, you do have to compromise and give up certain things. You want all the, like, you want to live in whatever place you want to live in. You're not even from there, but you want to live in whatever place you want to live in. You want to get the amount of money that you want to make. You want to get the apartment that you want. You want everything to be just at a spitting distance from you. You want to be able to grab that and grab this, and you just want to be super comfortable and everything to be perfect. That is unrealistic. And when it is the case that all these things are perfect, you're going to pay a hefty price.
Safety, because some neighborhoods are safer than others.
Should be safe.
For a whole week, I was just breaking down, looking at the prices. One night, I literally called my mom and I was like, Mom, I feel like a failure. I can't even afford living in this city. We've already put in one deposit, so ideally we don't.
You're not a failure. You've been out of college for a year. This is your first job, and you've moved all the way across the country, and you're trying to make sense of it and navigate the world. You're not a failure. You're just in the middle of realizing that a decision you've made probably does not work in the long term.
Go past another one. Is the agent here yet?
Could you picture a full bed in here with your desk?
Yeah, I feel like my desk would fit here, and then like I could have a full bed, but then like I need something for my closet. I love it, but I don't know if I can afford it, honestly.
This is the reality of New York City sized apartments, is that you could barely walk in your bedroom in some of these places. And this is for sure a luxury building. $4,800 for sure, a luxury building with like laundry, a gym, probably a pool somewhere, like crazy prices. But again, they are going to rent you for whatever it is you are going to pay.
So my roommate and I saw 3 or 4 apartments before finding the one that we have now that we just got approved for, and that process was insane. We actually applied to apartments that we didn't even know if we wanted to live in, just for backup, for safety, because it was just so competitive. There was even an apartment where we had to put in a $1,000 deposit just for our application to be considered.
Crazy. That's
you know, as a real estate agent throughout, you know, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, we're seeing that apartments are on the market for less than a week, and they would be rented at the first showing or first open house. The fastest listing that I had rented was in Bed-Stuy, and it had a backyard. It was a 2-bedroom rental with a backyard. We had previously rented it for $2,700. We put it on the market for $3,000, and we had close to 75 people at the first open house, and it rented that day, and I think it rented for $3,600.
That's what I'm saying to y'all. They are willing to rent it to you for whatever you're willing to pay. The apartment was previously $2,700 for a 2-bedroom. That was already too much. And then people are so competitive. You got 75 people showing up to rent it, that they had a bidding war. They had a literal bidding war over an apartment. And the reason why I'm pretty sure this rental got a bidding war is because of that backyard. You see, in Brooklyn, or in rentals in general, backyards are not that common. In Queens, pretty common. But if you want to live in a place like Bed-Stuy, which is a very gentrified, yuppie, what do they call those people? I forgot what they call them. But, you know, the younger white crowd, they love Bed-Stuy now. So, you know, Bed-Stuy do or die became their neighborhood. So it is exorbitant, and to also have a backyard that you can flex on the ground with, of course.
Another challenge for New Yorkers is the requirement that they earn 40 times the rent when applying for an apartment. With the median asking rent in Manhattan around $4,000, that means the minimum income to qualify for an apartment at that price is $160,000. The median household income in New York City is $67,000. If an applicant doesn't meet this requirement, they need to find a guarantor who makes at least 80 times the rent to co-sign their lease.
And that's why so many people have roommates, because you can make $60,000, $70,000 and then have a roommate, and then you can qualify for a super expensive apartment that you really don't need with a tiny bedroom. But yay, there's a gym.
Peace.
So my roommate and I toured this apartment. It was $4,800 for 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom in downtown Brooklyn. And it had everything that we wanted, but we didn't meet the criteria of making 40 times the rent in our income.
When I first moved into this apartment, it was $1,882 a month, and I was making $65K. I was very privileged enough to afford that rent requirement, but because it wasn't 40 times that, I needed a guarantor. That is something that was both embarrassing to deal with as a 29-year-old who, you know, with a master's degree, you know, I proved I can make it on my own, but here is a roadblock that doesn't make sense and seems to be very classist to push certain people.
I'm not even gonna lie to you, she's describing it as a roadblock, but I don't see it as a roadblock. Sometimes a rejection is really something that is giving you a signal or a warning for redirection, right? So she should have took that, oh, you need a guarantor, even though I make this amount of money and the rent is this much. Maybe I am biting off more than I can chew, right? Maybe I should reevaluate what it is that I want. Maybe I should reevaluate my budget. But nah, she probably went for the guarantor. And now the rent is even more. So it's very confusing. You shouldn't feel embarrassment if the person that's renting to you wants to guarantee that they get their money.
People out.
It's not classist.
With inventory rising right now, we're seeing a lot of that inventory come from people who are getting priced out of their pandemic deals. About 1/3 of the inventory in the city right now is coming from those people.
We've thought about Jersey City, which is really cool. It's not out of the question. I mean, those are all really close to New York.
Don't think about Jersey City.
It's just kind of like a wait and see kind of thing. But
we're
willing to do, you know, Brooklyn, Queens. I mean,
Casey is waiting until she finds a new job before starting her apartment hunt again.
There's so many remote opportunities now. Who knows where I'll end up? It could be in New York, I could be in Boston or Philadelphia. But I'm really open to anything, so.
But you see, she's open to anything except for just moving somewhere that's cheap. Like, I'm open to working anywhere and with any job remotely, specifically, but I just don't want to live anywhere that's cheap. If you're looking for remote work and you're gonna work remotely, why not work remotely somewhere more affordable? I don't know. These are just the questions I have to ask.
And here's my resume. Just kidding.
Thelma's lease ends in September 2022. She won't be renewing.
You know, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic how scary that was, and how, I mean, if you were here, it was very empty and scary. So to see New York come alive again has been incredible. And then to not even be able to continue to experience that joy simply because I can't afford to live here it's ridiculous, because I'm like, okay, then what's next? It is looking more like I'm going to put my stuff in storage and go to Europe and work remotely there and hope that housing calms down in New York.
Thelma ended up
She works remotely.
buying a one-way ticket to London.
Hopefully I can come back once the market has cooled down a little bit and I can find a spot, or I don't know.
Like, I feel sad for her, and because I can hear her voice cracking because she's really passionate. Sorry if, like, the lighting is, like, going out, like, the sun is going down, and, yeah, whatever. But I hear her voice cracking, and I see how emotional she is, and the reason she's so emotional about it is because she has so much attachment to identifying with living in New York and being a city girl. Like, you know what I mean? And I don't mean, like, city girl like JT. I mean city girl, like, as in the big city girl living in it. And that's part of the issue, is that some people are so attached to the idea of living in New York City that they're like, they have like blind, like they can't see anything else. They can't see the path to what it's going to be like when you're 60 and you're still renting, because you never were able to put money aside to save up for a mortgage or a down payment or whatever in order to own something and then pass that down to the next generation, or just have somewhere to live rent-free where you're just paying property tax or something because you blew the whole load in the early youthful part of your life. And you know, she's emotional about this again because, like she said, she wrote it in like her book or whatever when she was 17 that she wanted to live in New York City, in Manhattan, and she was able to accomplish that dream. Now, instead of just, you know, she could just chalk it up to the game and be like, yo, I lived in New York City, and then now I'm about to live in London, and just move around like that. But I see it happen so often. And mind you, I am from New York City. I had no problem dipping out on New York City in order to make sure that my finances will be straight, because New York City will drain your pockets with the tax, income tax, with the tax on goods and services, with the everything is inflated here just because of how convenient everything is. Really ain't even that convenient half the time. But I say all that to say, some people just really have to reevaluate how attached they get to these cities. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Maybe I'll officially become a London girl. Who knows?
Ernestine is moving to Brooklyn with her roommate. Her portion of the rent will be $2,200.
I love it. Originally, I was very against Brooklyn, but I actually love this area. I like this area more than where I originally am living right now in East Village. I love how it's like right by the water, and there's so many cute restaurants around, and it just seems like it's like easier access to like healthy things I could do in everyday life. So when we signed this lease for our new apartment, the upfront costs were $10,000. That's including the security deposit, and that's including first month's rent. But the thing that really
oh my God, thousands.
threw us off was the broker's fee, which was $2,000. I had to dig into my savings, and my savings literally, like, big chunk of it just went away. So I'm just going to have to change my lifestyle a little bit and, you know, save where I can. So it's just little compromises that you have to make. It's just all compromises.
And yeah, it really is a lot of compromises that you have to make, but you have to make the right compromises in order to get to the result that you actually want. And $10,000 to get into a nice luxury apartment. Bro, there's so many co-ops in New York City that go for less than, you know, $150K, $200K. $10,000 could have been a down payment for a co-op, and you would have owned it, and you would have been done with it. Like, yeah, you would have had a co-op fee, like it's almost like FHA. No, it's almost like, what do you call it? HOA. It's almost like HOA fees or whatever, but you would have been fine. And y'all wouldn't be paying over $4,000 for rent either. And you would have had a 2 or 3 bedroom.
Really an odd feeling not having a set place right now and just really kind of feeling like a nomad. So it's hard to think about where I'm going to be in a few months and where we're going to be settled in.
Nomad is extreme, girl. You just went to the Bronx. Like, let's not say you were nomad. You're still in New York City in the 5 boroughs. You just went to the Bronx and to an Airbnb. You're not a nomad.
And also my cat. I want to make sure my cat's happy.
It really does come down to supply and demand. There's a lot of people who want to live in New York, and the amount of apartments in New York, there's just not that many of them. And that imbalance right there is going to cause the unaffordability that we're seeing across the city.
The finish line keeps moving, and I'm like, what is the purpose of me running this race anymore?
With the U.S. economy on shaky ground, there's a chance that New York City rents could start to normalize.
We're gonna have to see a lot of inventory come online. So that'd be people moving out of the city, or a large rash of construction being built, or there's something going on with the demand side. If there's a ton of job losses, like in a recession, things like that, where people just couldn't afford what they could afford before, then that would also lead to prices to fall as well. So one of these two things has to budge.
The scales are starting to tip into buying. So if you look at that rent versus buy analysis, I think, you know, as rents are at an all-time high, it's really worth looking at, why am I spending $5,000 to rent when I could own the same apartment for less?
I think the hardest part during this process was the mental strain that it took on me. It was hard to choose between whether I wanted to pay the premium of New York City for the opportunities that you get here, or, you know, just move home and save my money.
I'm optimistic. I think this is a temporary fix and something's got to break. I think that at some point the mayor is going to have to do something, and we'll have more opportunities and more apartments out there.
Being able to have this for 2 years has been so uplifting and so inspiring. I feel almost unstoppable, and I feel so grateful, and I see New York coming alive, but at the same time New York is coming alive, I'm being pushed out at the same time. You know, New York tough is a saying, and it's true, but I feel like we're being beat down, and you can only be as tough as you can.
Yeah, girl, I really wanna sympathize with you, but you have to understand that you were crying about being displaced in a city you are not from. Like, you have to understand that you displaced somebody. I lived in, I'm not trying to make this about me or anything like that, but I'm just, okay, how about generally speaking, there are plenty of people who were born and raised or multiple generations in New York City that are pushed out because other people come into New York City seeking the opportunities that New York City has to offer, and they push out people who have already been here for decades. You understand? So you crying about the fact that you moved here in 2018 and now you feel like you're being pushed out or priced out. What do you think people who've lived here their whole life feel like? What do you think people who grew up in New York City since they were kids and couldn't wait to get their first apartment, only to realize that that is not happening anytime soon? That they have to stay home and live with their parents for an even longer amount of time, simply because, you know, 1 million people from all over United States and all over the world have now moved into New York City, and because they decide that it's okay for them to pay $1,200 for a bedroom or $1,400 for a bedroom for opportunities that they could have just created themselves in another place, that it's okay, and now rents are sky high. Now you're crying about the rent, but I live here. I don't actually have anywhere else to go. I don't have family in another state. If I move to another state, I have to start from scratch by myself with no safety net. Is it starting to make sense? I don't know I don't know how people rationalize it. I get it, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be supply and demand. And if you're not willing to adjust to what the world is putting in front of you, then you're gonna have to chalk that one up to the game and just take the L. Like, I'm sorry, like, I'm just keeping it real with y'all. Like, thank y'all for watching the video. Hopefully nobody feels too sensitive about how I address this type of thing. Again, I feel bad for people that end up having to move out because of extenuating circumstances, like their jobs or whatever. Some people have kids and they can't afford to live. That's what I'm trying to... I wish I could speak to her directly and have her understand that part. But it's like, you chose to live by yourself. You could have lived with a roommate in a not so fancy apartment and saved up a bunch of money, got a down payment, got a co-op, and lived the New York City girl lifestyle that you wanted. But instead, you went and skipped all the steps. You wanted to go fast in life instead of just slowing down and evaluating. And a lot of people do that, and I feel like that's where people go wrong. I did a video previously, the last video I did, where I spoke about how people are living paycheck to paycheck, and it's all based on their decisions and their spending habits. If you're doing things like this, like jumping into expensive apartments without reading contracts and understanding the rental market and the shifts and the ebbs and flows, then you're going to find yourself making a bad decision in a bad spot. But again, thank you guys for watching. It is the Drunk Capitalist here, and I'm going to see you guys next time with some next foolery and money news, money content, financial goals, financial literacy. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.